Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all taking care of yourselves and having a peaceful week so far. Today, we are stepping into a deeply fascinating, incredibly layered mystery that takes us into the brilliant but isolated world of a man who is considered a national treasure in Russia, only for his life to end in a shocking act of violence that remains entirely unexplained. It's a story about a genius who understood the history of his country through the food it ate, a missing manuscript, and a brutal crime hidden away inside a locked, reclusive apartment. This is the mysterious, tragic story of William Pokhlyobkin. To the rest of the world, William might not be a household name, but in Russia, he was an absolute titan. Born in 1923, William was a brilliant historian, a world-renowned geographer, and the foremost expert on the history of Russian cuisine. He wrote over 50 books, detailing everything from the cultural significance of tea to the historical evolution of traditional Slavic recipes. He was a master of his craft, an eccentric academic who lived entirely inside his own mind and his endless research papers. But as the 20th century drew to a close, William began pulling away from society. He didn't live a glamorous life of luxury despite his fame. Instead, he lived like a hermit in a modest, cluttered apartment in the city of Podolsk, just south of Moscow. He didn't own a television, he didn't have a telephone, and he rarely let anyone past his front door. He lived in a sanctuary of books, cooking pots, and fading history, completely unaware that his devotion to his final, greatest work would soon lead to a devastating end. By the spring of 2000, William was 76 years old, and he was working feverishly on what he considered his magnum opus, a sweeping, definitive historical volume titled Cuisine of the Century. The book was being eagerly anticipated by the Polyfact publishing house in Moscow, and the chief editor, a man who respected William immensely, knew this book would change how the world viewed culinary history. The deadline for the manuscript was strictly set for late March, but as the final days of the month rolled past, the publishing house grew completely silent. No packages arrived in the mail. No updates came from the reclusive author. Because William famously refused to have a telephone installed in his apartment, believing it to be an intrusion on his academic focus, the chief editor couldn't simply call him up to check on his progress. At first, the staff assumed the eccentric professor was just running a few days late, lost in his revisions. But as the calendar flipped from March 27th to March 31st, a deep, unshakable sense of dread began to settle over the chief editor. William was meticulous. He was disciplined. A delay this prolonged, with zero communication, was completely out of character. Realizing something was profoundly wrong, the editor stepped out of his Moscow office and boarded a train to Podolsk, determined to find his star author. The chief editor arrived at William's apartment building in Podolsk sometime between March 27th and March 31st. He walked up the concrete stairs, found the door to the historian's apartment, and knocked. Silence. He knocked again, harder this time, calling out William's name. Still, nothing but a heavy, chilling quiet echoed from inside. When the door was finally breached, the editor stepped into a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The apartment was a chaotic labyrinth of academic history. Thousands of rare books, antique maps, and historical culinary artifacts lined the walls. But the atmosphere was heavy with a terrible, unmistakable scent. In the center of the living area, the body of 76-year-old William Pokhlyobkin was discovered. He was slumped over, resting in a pool of dried blood. The scene was incredibly violent. An autopsy would later reveal that the frail elderly man had been stabbed repeatedly, suffering over 11 deep puncture wounds. The medical examiner estimated that he had been dead for several days, placing his tragic passing somewhere in the final stretch of late March. But as the police swarmed the apartment and launched a homicide investigation, the clues left behind only made the tragedy infinitely more baffling. The Podolsk detectives immediately began trying to find a motive for why anyone would brutally murder a reclusive, 76-year-old culinary historian. At first, they looked at the possibility of a standard robbery. William was known to have a valuable collection of rare books and historical documents. But when investigators cataloged the apartment, they discovered that his expensive collection, his saving money, and his personal valuables had been left completely untouched. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was deeply personal or deeply targeted. That's when the focus shifted back to the very reason the chief editor had traveled to Podolsk, the manuscript of cuisine of the century. When detectives searched William's writing desk, they found that the highly anticipated, completed manuscript was completely missing from the apartment. Had William uncovered something in his historical research that crossed paths with powerful, dangerous people? Or was the theft of the book a deliberate attempt to erase his final legacy? The rumors in the Russian academic community began to spiral. Some believed the murder was connected to William's landmark 1970s research into the origins of Russian vodka, a historical study that had saved the state billions in international trademark disputes, but had created powerful enemies in the global spirits industry. Others wondered if a desperate, jealous rival had killed the professor simply to steal his brilliant work and claim it as their own. Every lead seemed to vanish into the academic ether. More than 2 decades have passed since those dark days in March 2000, and the murder of William Pokhlyobkin remains one of Russia's most enduring and frustrating cold cases. No one was ever arrested, no murder weapon was ever definitively found, and the true motive remains locked away in the shadows of Podolsk. The tragic irony of William's life is immense. He dedicated his entire existence to preserving the flavor, the culture, and the heartbeat of his country's history, ensuring that future generations would always remember their roots. Yet, in his final moments, inside his own sanctuary of knowledge, he was left entirely unprotected. Though his final manuscript was stolen, the legacy of his prior works continues to inspire chefs, historians, and readers all over the globe. He was a brilliant, eccentric soul who proved that history isn't just found in battlefields or political treaties. It's found in the simple, profound acts of gathering around a table and sharing a meal. I want to know what you guys think about this incredibly mysterious case. Do you think William was targeted because of the valuable historical secrets buried within his missing manuscript? Or do you think his reclusive lifestyle made him a vulnerable target for a localized act of malice? Let's talk about it down in the comments below. And please, let's keep the discussion deeply respectful of his memory. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next deep dive. Bye.